The wind did not arrive like a warning. It arrived like a decision already made. It leaned into the neighborhood with the slow insistence of a hand on a shoulder, then pressed harder, until gutters gulped and shutters rattled and the sky stitched itself with lightning. All day the old lychee had stood there, freckled with lichen, holding on like it had always held on, summer after summer of heavy fruit, winter after winter of thin light. But storms don't negotiate. A sound like fabric tearing, only larger. A shudder in the ground. Then that sudden, indecent absence where a canopy used to be, and the street lamp naked in the rain. People stayed inside. A cat ran. The wind went on doing what it came to do. By morning the storm had thrown its dishes everywhere, tiles in the grass, fences yawning, a plastic chair 3 houses down. The lychee lay across the curb, roots turned up like the open palm of a giant. Mud slept in the lines of its roots. A century of water stains banded the trunk. I stepped out of the truck, boots sinking, and for a moment the silence startled me. Birds remember faster than we do. They'd already left to argue in another tree. A man in a blue raincoat walked over, his shoulders either wet or tired. He introduced himself as Min, then didn't say anything for a few breaths, just looked at the ragged stump, the torn grass, the long red-brown body of the tree resting like a ship too far from tides. When he finally spoke, it came out like sawdust, an apology. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "She planted it when my father was born. We picked fruit here every June." He ran his fingers along the damp bark, then pressed his thumb against the chains where the city had already tried to drag the branches aside. "Can anything good come from this?" I said the only honest thing when you don't yet know the shape of what you're about to promise. "Maybe." I walked the length of the trunk, measuring by stride, listening with my hands the way you listen to a sleeping child. 2 long straight runs, a broad crotch where 2 limbs had once debated the sky. Beneath the slick bark the grain swirled in patient spirals, a slow handwriting written year upon year. "If we take the heart from here," I said, pointing, "we could mill slabs. Something small enough to live in a room but big enough to hold stories. A coffee table, perhaps." Min nodded, but his mouth stayed uncertain. "Not a memorial," he said, looking at the torn yard, the broken fence, and something deeper than both. "Just something that keeps the promise of being here." I set wedges so the trunk wouldn't roll, marked chalk lines where the saw would run, and called for help. The storm had taken the tree in a single night. The rest of this would refuse to be rushed. When we lifted the first branch, 3 neighbors came, then 2 more, then a teenager still damp from sleep. Someone brought thermoses. Someone else brought silence. We cut limbs back to the trunk, and while we worked, the wind died into the kind of air that keeps secrets. The tree didn't complain. It had already done all its shouting. It lay there, steady as a promise, and waited to find out what else it might become. Before the saws, we told its story to each other so we would not forget it while we were turning it into boards. Min said his grandmother planted the lychee the summer she learned to wait for letters. She dug the hole herself, carried a sapling from the market in a basket, and poured the first bucket of water like a prayer. That first year the tree did nothing except learn the shape of wind. The second year it learned to cast a small shade on the steps where her baby, Min's father, sat with a wooden truck and a laugh that you could hear all the way to the corner. The third year, one red fruit. It tasted like a promise too sweet for such a small mouth, and she laughed at herself for expecting more. By the time Min was 5, the canopy was a green umbrella over their summers. The fruit came in clusters, smooth pebbled shells that left their scent on your thumbs. Children stood on overturned buckets to reach low branches. Adults brought stools and stories. Fingers turned sticky and happy. The tree was a calendar that did not hang on any wall. When the monsoon rolled in, fat drops tamped the dust, and the lychee leaves shook it off like a dog. When electricity went out, they sat under it with candles and told stories that had been told 100 times and were somehow never finished. In winter the tree held the thin light and looked patient. In spring it made promises and kept them. And then the storm, and the indecent absence, and Min standing by the open palm of roots. I touched the stump's rings, counting as if that could make a century sit still. Dry years squeezed tight like worry, generous years wide as a yawn, a dark seam where lightning once whispered but did not take. "A coffee table," Min said again, when I said nothing. "So we keep sitting where we used to stand." He smiled without his eyes and pointed at the front room through the open door. It had a low couch, a window heeled with tape, a thin carpet that remembered bare feet. It would go there. We brought out the chainsaw mill. I set the rails level and squared the carriage, dropped the bars slowly through the first cut until the saw found its own nerve and steadied. The lychee released a smell wet as tea and slightly sweet, as if the fruit had somehow ripened all the way down into the wood. pale hardwood laced with pink, bark tight and opinionated. The first slab came off heavier than it looked. It always does. We stickered it, thin spacers every handspan, so air could pass. Then another slab, and another, open pages from a book that had lived too long closed. The crotchwood, where 2 leaders had once argued with the sky, showed a storm map of figure, grain whirled like fingerprints, a dark island inside a lighter sea. There are boards for cabinets, and boards for instruments, and then there are boards that are simply reservations made for conversations yet to happen. This was the last kind. We marked it with chalk, tabletop, keep. When we paused to drink, the neighbors told stories I pretended not to memorize. A boy learned to climb on this limb. A girl told her first secret under that one. Min's father proposed to his mother on a night when rain applauded on the leaves. We in the wood both were being asked to hold more than weight. When the city truck came again to collect debris, the driver saw our neat stack, nodded once, and left. He understood. Some things you do not haul away, some things you agree to carry differently. We loaded the slabs into the truck, tied them with care that looked like love if you didn't know about tension and friction, and drove slowly back to the shop. The storm had decided quickly, the wood would not. There are 3 tools you cannot buy new: air, time, and the discipline to let both do what they do. In the shop, we stacked the lychee slabs on stickers respectful as prayer beads. The meter blinked a number no one argues with, wet, so we did the hardest work, which is almost nothing. We sealed the ends with wax to temper the urge to split. We opened windows when the breeze asked nicely, then shut them when night tried to bargain away the day's dryness. Every Friday I wrote down numbers in a ledger that, to anyone else, would look like a list of the same word, becoming. While the lychee was learning its new language, the shop did what shops do. We sharpened a plane that had dulled on woodworking sins both innocent and ambitious. We fixed a wobbly stool that had taught 3 children to stir batter and 1 adult to rest a knee. I called Min once a month and said the only honest update, which was always a sentence without a verb. It's changing. He laughed in that way people laugh when they are learning the cost of patience. We are too, he said. My father comes by and looks at the empty space by the window. He says it's funny how a missing thing can take up so much room. By late autumn the slab sang a different note when I knocked the edge with a knuckle. The meter's number had come down to a number that furniture respects. There were narrow checks near the pith and one bold one running halfway across the broad slab. The storm had written its last sentence there. I like a crack that tells the truth. It gives you something to answer back to. We planed away the high spots, then built a router sled because patience beats pride when a board twists its opinions into diagonals. Pass after pass, thin as breath, the surface leveled into a quiet that you could see. Halfway through, the router coughed, and the bit sparked. I cut power and ran a finger into the groove. Something hard, thin, stubborn, impatient with explanation. Pliers pulled out a nail thin as a memory, black as regret. Someone had posted something once: yard sale, missing dog, school play, and the tree had swallowed the little announcement whole. The metal left a dark streak through the pale, a river of night through a morning sky. I could chase it with bleach and sand, bully it into almost gone. Or I could leave it. I left it. Lighting can be too literal. The streak would be a sentence that kept its meaning, a piece of the tree's unedited life running under someone's coffee mug. We shaped 2 bow tie keys from an offcut with the grain mirrored like folded hands. I cut the pockets with a trim router, shaved to the knife line with a chisel until the fit sounded like a kiss when pressed home. Glue thin, clamps just enough, patience while chemistry remembered its manners. After an hour we wiped away squeeze out and ran a fingertip over the bow ties as if they were stitches, then tried not to be sentimental about it. They were not an apology for the crack. They were a declaration: this is where it hurt, and this is where we chose to stay. At night the shop was silent in the human registers and rowdy in the small ones. Wood remembers. It shifts in the dark, breathes, settles again. I came in one morning to find a thin cup in the top, the kind that makes a level roll a little before it changes its mind. We addressed it with the calm that keeps mistakes from turning into stories you don't want to tell. Another pass with the sled. Another hour of dust that remembered the smell of fruit. The board learned to be still. We learned, again, not to hope for it, to work for it. We cut the slab to length and sat it on trestles at the height where knees forgive you. The base would be a quiet geometry that behaves. 4 legs splayed just enough for steadiness without swagger. A low stretcher that lets a foot rest, joinery that a repairer in a different decade could read at a glance. No false cleverness, no hiding. The top would float a finger's thickness above the aprons, a shadow gap that turns mass into a line, gravity into poise. I laid out the mortises in pencil, then knifed the lines so the chisel would remember where to stop. Tenants should be proud enough to show their honesty without making a speech. We cut shoulders crisp, cheeks true, edges chamfered for the mercy of shins. When the first dry fit came together, the joints sighed into place the way a door does when the house admits its winter. The frame stood square on the floor that lists a little toward the window. I admired it for being better than its circumstances. Then the surprise. There is always one, when gluing up the top. A clamp slipped while I checked the diagonals, and the panels crept into a tiny mischief of misalignment. I could have bullied it flush and called it good, but the joint would have remembered my hurry for the rest of its life. We backed up gracefully. Glue waits for no one, but it does forgive a few sins if you apologize with hot water and discipline. We reset, reclamped, breathed. The grain aligned like two people agreeing to tell the same story from now on. The crack with the bow ties had a slightly high lip. Human fingertips would find it every time and think of broken things instead of strong ones. I planed it until your hand would glide without noticing the moment, the way a sentence drops a comma you don't miss. The nail's dark river stayed right where it wanted. We eased edges with a small chamfer, not a fashion choice so much as kindness for wrists and mugs. In the corner by the window the afternoon pushed a slow square of light across the surface, and the figure in the crotch opened like a map no one had asked for but everyone understood, a storm drawn carefully in wood. We drilled and pegged the joints with dowels we turned from the same lychee, so when the table aged it would do so with one voice. The legs received their small arches where feet meet floor, enough to lift the mass and let a broom pass with gratitude. I put the base and top together on the bench and stood back. Sometimes furniture pleads, sometimes it accepts. This accepted. It looked like it had always known how to be in a room. Min stopped by then, carrying 2 paper cups that steamed in the cold. He put them on the bare top without flinching. "I wanted to see it before it was beautiful," he said, and then shook his head at his own sentence. "No, that's not what I mean. I wanted to see it before you talked me into thinking it was always meant to be this." He ran a finger along the bow tie. "This is where it hurt," he murmured, and smiled with all of his face this time. "This is where we stayed." On scrap from the same slab we tested finishes, because truth needs a rehearsal. Oil alone tasted like dusk, sweet but a little thin. Varnish made a loud promise the wood didn't want to keep. Hard wax oil, low sheen, high honesty. The pores drank, the figure stepped forward, the color warmed into a honey rose that remembered fruit without pretending to be it. We committed. Cloths moved in slow circles, and the shop took the hint and went quiet. When finishing begins, everyone knows to lower their voice. The first coat taught us what would stay. The nails river bronzed at the edges like old coins. The bow ties declared not as surgery but as vows. The crotch figure resolved from confusion into currents. After a night, we scuffed lightly with a paper that whispers rather than argues, then gave it the second coat, then a third where hands would live. Under raking light the surface did not wave or confess. It settled into the modest confidence of something that knows its job. Delivery day arrived shyly. We wrapped the table in blankets the color of modesty, tied them with straps that creaked in the polite language of tension, and drove slowly to Min's. The street looked cleaner than memory, as if the storm had been a story told too loudly and now the town was tired of it. Inside, the room waited without pretending. We set the table down by the window where the light pauses before it leaves. When we pulled the blankets away, the air changed, not dramatically, just enough that someone took a breath they didn't know they were holding. A year later I walked past the window at dusk because some places just asked you to check on them, the way you check the door before bed even when you know it's locked. Voices moved inside, nothing grand, only the ordinary choreography of plates and pauses. The table wore a constellation of small evidence, a faint ring like a calendar that forgot to be serious, a shallow scratch that began as a gasp then became a story about a toy truck and a startled hand, a deepening glow where elbows preferred to rest. The bow ties had darkened a tone, the nails river darker still. It did not look new. It looked present. Later Min told me his father sometimes sits at the table in the mornings with tea and scrapes a thumb along the shadow line where the top floats above the apron, as if reading Braille for a poem he already knows. He said sometimes his father falls asleep there in the afternoon light and wakes gentle. He said the child with the toy truck now parks it carefully at the same corner and whispers, "Good night," to the wood. He said in June they still eat fruit in the sticky way and the table is patient with them. When storms come now, the family lights 2 candles instead of 1 and sets them on small saucers because memory doesn't have to be impractical. The wind leans in, the rain signs its old name on the window, and the table does what it promised. It carries the weight you can measure, and the weight you can't. On the underside, the note waits for a future pair of hands. Upstairs, a photo from a summer long before shows a grandmother holding a basket and smiling into a sun we can no longer step under. The table is not a monument to her. It is a continuation of her sentence. A year later, I walked past the window at dusk because some places just asked you to check on them, the way you check the door before bed even when you know it's locked. Voices moved inside, nothing grand, only the ordinary choreography of plates and pauses. The table wore a constellation of small evidence, a faint ring like a calendar that forgot to be serious, a shallow scratch that began as a gasp then became a story about a toy truck and a startled hand, a deepening glow where elbows preferred to rest. The bow ties had darkened a tone, the nails river darker still. It did not look new. It looked present. Later, Min told me his father sometimes sits at the table in the mornings with tea and scrapes a thumb along the shadow line where the top floats above the apron, as if reading Braille for a poem he already knows. He said sometimes his father falls asleep there in the afternoon light and wakes gentle. He said the child with the toy truck now parks it carefully at the same corner and whispers, "Good night," to the wood. He said in June they still eat fruit in the sticky way and the table is patient with them. When storms come now, the family lights 2 candles instead of 1 and sets them on small saucers because memory doesn't have to be impractical. The wind leans in, the rain signs its old name on the window, and the table does what it promised. It carries the weight you can measure and the weight you can't. On the underside, the note waits for a future pair of hands. Upstairs, a photo from a summer long before shows a grandmother holding a basket and smiling into a sun we can no longer step under. The table is not a monument to her. It is a continuation of her sentence. I do not go often. You should not keep visiting your work as if you do not trust it. But sometimes, when the air smells like rain and metal and fruit, I stand outside and watch the room. I think of how the roots once held the earth the way 2 hands hold a bowl, how the trunk lay open like a book, how the neighbors learned together to carry something forward. I remember Min asking if anything good could come from it, and the honest answer I gave because I had no better one, maybe. The rest was air, time, and the discipline of letting both do what they do. If you put your ear to the table when the house is quiet, you might imagine you hear leaves. You don't. What you hear is softer and more human. The slight complaint of a chair leg finding its mark, the whisper of a sleeve, the light click of a cup set down in the middle of a conversation. It is not the tree speaking. It is the life that replaced it, saying, without speeches or effort, what all good furniture hopes to say. We stayed. We kept the promise. We learned to gather again. And when the wind comes back, as wind always does, we know what grows after it leaves.